What's up, everybody? It's K4K Crypto here. Got another video coming out. This is going to be about explaining the AMM fixer bot. It's going to be fully explained about what really happens. I don't care what other videos you watch. I don't care what you think is going to happen. This is actually how it works. Okay? This is the only way it can work without actually like stealing coins from people. You have to do it this way. It's through using the way the automated market maker works, of how there's reserves of coins and how you can't just remove liquidity with from people. This is actually, you have to buy it up by minting Pulse. I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna explain it. Because a lot of people get confused, at least in my chats, about how it works, and they think it works a certain way. It doesn't work that way. So this will make it all clear. It also explains why the PulseX DEX will be so liquid and everything else will basically be like desolate. So let's get into it. First, thanks for liking and subscribing the video. That's amazing. All right, so we got, there we go. Boom. Gonna shrink myself here. You're gonna totally understand it after this video. Woo! Okay. Okay, I'm gonna put myself over here. Alright, there's one crucial thing that I think a lot of people have been missing with how the bot works, and they think that people who own Uniswap liquidity pre-fork get anything in the PulseX DEX. They don't. All liquidity that's deployed to PulseX, they're getting zero of it. And you're like, well, how is that possible? I thought they got their amount, in LP in PulseX. Nope. Why would they get something that they don't own anymore? They don't own the stuff that the AMM bot buys up from their pool. And maybe you're still confused. We'll get to there. They own the LP whenever, at the start of the chain, they own their percentage of the Uniswap LP or SushiSwap LP that they own. Okay? So look here. Imagine this Hex ETH pool. There's 12 million Hex, 480 ETH. Alright, now let's go to say the fork happens. There's 12 million Hex there. Now it's technically P Hex. And then the Ethereum is now Pulse. But obviously this is not a fair amount of Pulse in this pool versus this amount of Hex, right? Because Pulse is 1.2, we'll say it's like 1 million to 1.2 million times more plentiful than Ethereum is. And so in order to make it more fair ratio-wise, because Pulse basically becomes the ETH of our system, we need to increase the amount of Pulse in these pools by 1.2 million X. Okay. Now, how do you do that in an AMM bot or in an AMM? You can't just multiply it by 1.2 million. That's not how you do it. That would push the price up like way too much. It would be way too much. So what really happens is you multiply the Pulse by, now you just have, here, I'll show you. So 1095 times 1095 equals 1.2 million. You can do the math yourself. You'll be surprised. I know it seems weird. You're like, how does that equal 1.2? It does. So what happens is you multiply this Pulse side by 1095. This is how much Pulse is pumped into the PulseX pool, which removes all of the Hex here when you're like, well, where'd it go? This is how much it removed, because we divide the Hex side by 1095. And that's how you get the 1095 times 1095 because it works like this. Here's like a little simple demonstration of how this math works out, because the price moves as a square in these AMMs. So if you have a starting pool of 1,000 versus 1,000 units of something versus 1,000 units of something, okay? I'll make myself a little smaller here. All right, you got 1,000 units versus 1,000 units. Sweet. They're equal. Okay, so then if you double one side, let's say it's USD, doesn't really matter what it is. Now there's 2,000. And the way AMMs work is you always have to keep a constant, basically, value between like these two numbers always, unless someone adds or removes liquidity, no matter what, this ratio, or not this ratio, but the value between these two, whenever multiplied together, have to equal the same thing. So if you multiply 1,000 times 1,000, it's the same thing as 2,000 times 500. I should have really added what 1,000 times 1,000 is. Here, well, let's go do it real quick. All right, 1,000 times 1,000. What do we got? We got lag. There we go. It's 1 million. Should have known that one. All right, let's do 2,000 times 500. It's also 1 million. Awesome. So that's how you know you're doing it correctly, is if you have that same constant product between the two you're changing. So a simple way of figuring out, like, okay, how much can we move the price, is if you double one side, it 4x's the price of the token on the other side. So how does that math work out? Well, this is a good way of understanding it. If you double the backing of one coin and have the amount of the tokens that are being backed by the double, what you get is basically 2 divided by 1/2. And if you do that math, 2 divided by 1/2 divided by 1/2 is 4. Because the price of this is now, it's half of the tokens is actually worth double now. That makes sense? So it's a 4x difference now than this. Okay, so now that you understand that, that's what's happening over here, but on a much larger scale, to 1.2 million x instead of 4x over here. And in order to get a 1.2 million x, you only need to multiply the pulse side by 1,095. I wish it was just a simpler number to say, but it's not. Okay, so that just gives you this amount of pulse that gets pumped in, and that is able to extract basically 99.9% of the hex, and that is now owned by the bot that we're talking about here, that mints this pulse, which is a very small amount of pulse, in order to purchase up 99% of the PRC20. Okay. So it now owns this amount of the PRC20 from this pool. And then what happens next is, now that it pushed up the price of hex to this ratio by pouring in, like at 1.2 million x, the price, the virtual price of hex, by pushing in all of this pulse, now this is the new way high price. It's now only 10,000. It's 10,959 hex equals 525,600 pulse. That is the new price of hex to pulse. Okay? And so what we do here is, now that the bot owns basically 12 million, we'll say, of the hex, it keeps this same ratio. So for every 10, we'll just say 11,000 hex it owns, for every 11,000 hex out of its 12 million, it has to mint 525,600 more pulse to match each 11,000 hex. And what you find is, how many times does 10,959 go into 12 million? It's 1,095. And so 1,095 times this amount gets you this amount. And that is what gets it, because the bot can create pulse out of thin air. It just goes bloop, more pulse created so that we can buy it up and fix the ratios. That's why it's increasing the supply from like 1 to 2.5%. So it does that by literally creating it. It has the ability. It's not like it does, like it has to have the ability, basically. So this is what the remaining Uniswap pool looks like after the fixer bot has gone in and purchased up most of the PRC20 by fixing the ratio, increasing the price by 1.2 million X. If you were a Uniswap liquidity provider, before the fork, you own whatever percent of that Uniswap pool that you owned before the fork. You own ownership in this pool that has almost no liquidity left. Because as we know, that like 500,000 pulse is like super cheap. That's like $50 worth. It's like $100 worth total in this whole pool, going by pulse equaling 1/10,000th of a dollar, which is what the average sacrificer paid. So this total pool here is worth like $100. That's what's left in the Uniswap pool, and also in the SushiSwap pool for the same thing. That's going to get harvested the exact same way. It gets bought up by the pulse being minted. Does the exact same thing. It takes 99.9% of the PRC20, and then it mints more at that increased ratio price in order to make way more liquidity, 576 million, versus the PRC20, because in AMMs you have to put in equal amounts of liquidity value on either side. And so whenever the bot technically, whenever it owns this stuff, it could make the ratio whatever it wanted and mint any amount of pulse it wanted. It could make the price even higher when it deploys it to PulseX. But we're going to keep the ratios that were already determined by the fair market to be fair whenever we go and deploy it to PulseX. So, because this virtually moves the prices up as if Pulse was ETH in the system, but also accounting for the 1.2 million X in like increased supply. And so that's why we have to increase it so that the amount of pulse in the pool is fair in valuation. So it's basically acts as the ETH. So then this is the PulseX pool. We basically deploy what we removed from this pool with the matched up increase in price amount versus this. And then you just deploy it. This is the new PulseX pool. Boom. We can see how it maintains the ratio. We don't change it. We keep it at the same price. Not price. Well, yeah. It's like the same ratio, which is price in these systems. So that's what happens. And what we see here, this is just the Uniswap pool. The Hex pool, or the Hex ETH pool that's in SushiSwap and 0x, and if we can do it from UniV3, we're going to remove that liquidity as well, and we park it in at the same price level. And so it's just going to be like you just pile it all into one pool. So you might see there might be 1 billion or so pulse in this pool, and then you also would double this side because you keep it at the same ratio. And so unit-wise, it's going to be the most liquid exchange for tokens, because so many tokens are being combined from all those pools into one place, which means a very liquid exchange for people to trade in, which is good. You get better order execution. So that is how the automated market maker works. Automated market maker bot. It goes in, purchases up the PRC20 by minting Pulse at first, just a little bit of Pulse, and then it throws it in there. It buys up 99.9% because of how the math works out for the amount that we chose to multiply it by. Like, what multiple do we decide? If we decide to do 1,000,000x, then you would just multiply the starting pulse by 1,000, and it'd be 1,000,000 times. So it's and the reason we get that number, actually, people wonder where do we get the over here? No. So currently there's 118 million Ethereum total supply right here. And then there's 133 projected trillion supply and for Pulse. So if we divide that by 118 million, we actually get a number that's not 1.2 million times, it's 1.12, it's like 1.1 million. So the math all still checks out. It's just that we may use either 1,000,000x to 1.2 million x. But that's where that 1 point whatever million x you want to use to extract the PRC20s comes from. It's just deciding on how high do you want to push the prices of these things to make it as accurate as possible to the prices according to Ethereum AMMs. And yeah, I hope that made it more clear for people on understanding this. Here's like the supply breakdown of Pulsechain. So yeah, I hope that broke it down for you guys pretty well. If you haven't already, like the video, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we got more content coming out. If you haven't seen my most recent video, I talk about some of the awesome potentialities of PulseX and what can happen to the top 5 favorite Richard Hart coins and how we're basically going to dominate crypto. But anyway, this is how the AMM market maker bot works. If you guys have any questions or concerns, or you think it's wrong or something, go ahead and put a comment in the video. So, thanks for watching, everybody, and peace out. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for watching the video all the way to the end. I really appreciate you guys helping me out with the channel, liking and commenting, subscribing. This is how we make impact in the world. We're not going to make impact if people don't hear our message. So spreading good information when you find it helps everyone, and it helps yourself. So feel free to check out these videos I have recommended here. And thank you again for supporting the channel.